This is Terry McDade, aka the Pirate Hunter, and this is an in-box kit review of Trumpeters 1/35th scale German Railway Gondola lower sides. It doesn't really look that big, well it kind of does in my tab too, but this is really a pretty good sized box. And it is full of a lot of plastic, and it's bigger plastic because this kit measures 280.38 millimeter, 86.8 millimeter in width, and 81.64 millimeter in height. So the finished kit's pretty good sized. Before we look at that, a little bit about the German railway system in World War II. The German railway system at the start of World War II was a different gauge than the Soviet railway system, which prevents you from using their railway lines, and also, at the same token, prevents them from using yours and their railway stock on yours and things like that. So the Germans had a group called the Railroad Pioneers. I watched a German newsreel movie about them, and what they were tasked with was building railroads, repairing railroads. Some of the items they built was quite interesting. And one thing what you do then, if you are invading a foreign country whose railway gauge is different than yours, you use your railroad pioneers to re-gauge the railway. Now the one video that I watched that was of a newsreel said they re-gauged hundreds of miles of railway into Soviet Union. Now I don't know if this was on a main line or if it was a combination of a main line, spur lines, things like that. But if they did it straight on a main line, then it goes quite a ways into the Soviet Union. So what you do, it's relatively simple. It's a very much manual labor back in them days. To do that was you use your spike pulling tools. You pull your spikes out of one rail on one side. Then you get your railroad aligning bars, and you get a whole crew of guys, and you move that rail on the other side, or you can move whichever one you want into it or out. And then you use your railroad gauging bar, and you just go down there and you just check it as you go to make sure that it's the right gauge for your railway stock. Now, with a well-trained crew, you can take and do this rather rapidly. It's, like I said, a lot of manual labor to get it done, but you can do it within a reasonable amount of speed. So that's how the Germans were able to use some of their railway rolling stock in the Soviet Union. So let's look at this box, and we'll get going with all the stuff that's inside of it. Pretty good box art on the front. It shows a four-barreled flak on one end of the car, and these railroad cars, they were used for all sorts of things. And so they were used for hauling freight, hauling soft-skinned vehicles. I believe also there's supposed to be a photo of a Marder 3 on one of these. These were the lighter railway cars. Now, they had the heavier ones that they used for hauling the heavier tanks on it, and there's plenty of photographs showing that. And you could have an anti-aircraft gun car in the middle of a train, or two or three in a train, which would be quite interesting when you're facing either a P-38 or a P-47, P-51 coming at you at several hundred miles an hour with 6 to 8 gun barrels blazing. So enough of the waffling, let's look at some more of this. Okay, on the side box, it has a little bit of information about it and a picture. We'll take and hold it here for a second so you can pause it and read it. The end of the box art is standard, same front picture. On this side, it shows the photographs of the finished model. And it's a pretty good looking model, it really is. decal. We'll look at the decals first on this because I really like these decals on this. If I can get them out of the bag. They come there with a thin soft piece of tissue paper like taped to the front of them, and these are really tough to see in this whiteout. This is my second attempt on building this video after I found all the mistakes I made on the first one, and I don't know if you can really see the decals on it or not, but they are really, really thin decals. They're well within register. I mean, the film behind them is right to the edge of them, all the way around them. It doesn't say who made them, but they are very, I don't know if you can see that, we'll give up on that, but they are very, very good looking decals. Next, we'll look at the instructions here. The front of it, it says German Railway Gondola, lower sides. On this corner right down here, it shows you to use super glue on it, whether it needs a weight, make hole, cut, remove, option, no cement, decal, bend, file, sand. Has the standard warnings on this side. You open it up, first thing you find in here is the color scheme, painting and marking guide for your railway car. And it shows it, you know, just in a lighter grayish green, different color patterns on it. And this color call on it, paint reference chart, shows Mr. Hobby, Vallejo, Model Master, Tamiya, and Humbrol. So not much color options on this. Now I shouldn't say that, because you have on this, you could really do a lot of weathering on this, because these things would have got a lot of usage. They'd been out in the weather all the time. Rain, snow, sun, heat, things like that. The boards would have got damaged, and everybody puts the decals on perfectly, and I do too, but you got to realize a lot of these markings, the paint markings on this, would have, some of them would have got damaged, would have got scraped, same as on a real German armored vehicle. The Balkan Cruise and all this other stuff would not have stayed pristine. It would have got damaged, scraped, wore, things like that. So it's something to think about. And here it shows another mark for aqueous hobby color and Mr. Color. So that's the different paints, calls out for it. First page in your book, that's a pretty good sized book. First page in your book is your sprue map with your decal map on it. Shows you have two of these, two of these, two of these, one of these. Your road base things. This is another reason why it's got a lot on this. Then the first part that it shows you to build is your road base, and it shows you have to trim off road A. You trim just that one edge, and then you have to trim two of the railroad ties off of L4. And I don't know if this is because this kit, these road bases or the tie setups are used in another kit, because Trumpeter makes a whole bunch of these railroad rolling stock. Andy's Hobby Headquarters has done a whole bunch of videos on doing these, and they're a pretty neat kit. They really are. This, now here's how it works on this. These ties, the tie setup all slides up into the bottom of the base. Then you take and you slide the rails through from this end, and it holds them all in place. Lines that you don't have to mix and match and line, try to hold them while you're trying to glue tie plates down on it. And this, I think my mini art is that way. And this has, you have your side rail plates that go through and lock on both sides to hold their section of them together. This, and then on step 3 is where you start into building up the railway car. Now, one thing that was brought out in one video I watched is right here. these railroad shoes. They have a bunch of play in them. When you go to, they'll move from side to side when you go to put them on. And what can happen is you can get them too narrow, and then when you go to fit the wheel down inside here, then what it does, it doesn't fit. So what they suggested is you put you an axle together, then set it down inside here, then take and set your shoes on either side where they're just barely touching or just about to touch, glue them. Once they've set a little bit, you can take the wheel and axle out. Then when you go to assemble it, then you don't have to worry about it not lining up on it. Shows you your assembly down here on your hooks, your buffers. Now they have two different buffers. It's called a globe buffer and a flat buffer on this, and the picture on the box art shows definitely which one goes which place on it, and they were specific where they went. Step 4 on this is all your small parts. Putting it together, putting your buffers on, putting your hoses on it. These are all your side plates that go on it. Shows you putting the two sections of your railroad car together with the axle and the rods in between. And the one thing I looked at, they said it's easier to do it if it's setting on its side, because you got a bunch of moving parts all at once you have to do. Now, one question I have on this, because of the thing, it says right here, it says make hole and make hole. Okay, how big a hole do you make? Don't know, don't say. So I guess you just figure it out as you go on it. On this is where you put your 4 sections together on it. You've got your side rails that go on it, then your floor sections go down on this. You've got your air tank on it, you've got your end pieces on it, and these all have, we'll look at it on the plastic, but these all have little sections, tabs these set down on, so they set on there right, and it lines them up pretty good. This is your top thing for around your top rail on it. And your final assembly of doing your side rails, and it goes down inside. You can put them on, you can leave them loose, you can glue them in place, you can use some, none, all on it. And these things could actually be used as a flatbed rail car. That way when they were loading like half tracks on it or other vehicles, they could just run from one end to the other on it with just putting the small bridges over it as they went from one car to another off the loading ramp. So let's look at some of this plastic we got, and we'll see and go from there on it. Okay, these are your roadway parts on this. And in the one drawing, it showed trimming this section off right here on both sides. And let's trim it off, then all you have to do is fit it together. On that, you have 2 places you have to trim it. But other than that, it goes together fairly quick on it. This is your one long solid piece on it, on your base on it here. And the ballast looks pretty good on it. It really does. Now this is 2 sections that I snapped together. That's how they go together. They just snap here and go together. Had a lot of sink marks on the bottom, but you're not going to see them, or ejection pin marks, I should say. But the ballast on this is really quite good. It's sharp edged, a lot of detail on it. Now it is, I don't know if this is the 2 that's supposed together or not. I just stuck them together. I can always change them, they snap apart. The only issue I found is you do have a seam right here. But it's a real small seam, and the seam here, but as you paint it and do any weathering on it, it should hide that center. This seam is small enough that I think you could possibly just super glue, not super glue, use some Tamiya extra thin. Just put it on there, make sure it's lined up good, push it together so it melts in a little bit, and then sand it down, see what it does. And this I like. This is the system that it showed you in there with the railroad rails, and I like this, that they have put some little thin protective material on it, and keeps it from gouging into the rest of the plastic, gouging into any of the parts, because these are kind of sharp edged on them, and they're small, which means they'd have a tendency to gouge on it. Now these are your two sections of rails. You got your long section here and your shorter section over on this end. Now your rail plates here, which have got all the bolts on them, on the inside all have little small tiny tabs that fit into these holes here, so it lines them up, holds them, pulls them together relatively straight, put it together, glue them, looks good. And these are your ties. Now all these ties have, I don't know if you can hear that or not, have grain on them, wood grain on them. So when you go to paint them, or I don't know if you can see it on it or not, I don't think so, go to paint them and weather them, you've got a lot of wood grain there. If you wanted, you could take a little bit, put a little bit more on it. But these are the same kind of thing. They have the female end right here on both ends, and these have the male end to snap down into them to hold them in place. Now when you stick them together, I watched the one video on it, and they do have a little bit of play, but once you slide the rails in, you can line them up, do whatever. Now you could use that base as doing a vignette base right there. Or if you are doing a regular diorama or vignette where you're using celluclay or clay, Fimo clay, you could stick the railroad sections together and just set it down, push it down into it, and then when you filled it with, put your ballast in on it, it would cover all these up, because these aren't very, very thick sections right through there with holding the ties together. Then they're all lined up. You don't have to play the three-handed game there trying to get them all to line up in this. Looks pretty good, really. This one is, it's a double, there's two sprues of this. This has, as I said, you have the one buffer that's rounded and flat, goes on the buffer assemblies. Now these are your brake shoes here, and this is what I was talking about, because the way they go on, they're trying to line them up, they can move. And these are your wheels here, and inside section of your wheels, outer section of your wheels. And there's not really what I call a lot of ejection pin marks. There's, you know, a few on this, but on this stuff it's really clean. It really is. There's really no sprue flash on it. Everything looks really good. Now this here on it, you're going to have to be careful when you look at that and see if you've got to cut that off, if it stays, if you have to drill it out or anything like that to get it to line up. But all the parts on this, these are your airline connectors here. And you could, if you wanted to really detail this, you could get you some plastic, real small plastic tubing, or really small wire, and make your hoses out of that, so it looked, you know, a little more realistic hanging down there. And you could set this up where if you had more than one car, if you had two cars, you could actually connect them together with it. There's, when you put it together, instead of gluing it, just put one section together, glue that, and then you can snap it over one of the other sections and the whole thing will pivot on it. This is another mirrored sprue here. These are your sideboards on it, and they've got a lot of raised wood grain on it. They look pretty good. The bolt heads, all the bolt heads on this look really, really good. These are your side pieces I was talking about that go down into the tabs on the side to hold it in place. This is your air tank here on it. You've got both halves. Looks really good. No flash on this. And on these especially, which is the good thing, there is no ejector pin marks. On this, on the where it back side of it, where it goes against the rail car, yeah, there's some, but nothing out in the open where you can see it. All the ejector pin marks are really well hid. This is the other one for the other mirrored sprue for that. And this is the main sprue for putting it all, the side rails and your boards on it, your floor on it. Now, all your ejector pin marks are on the inside of this. These, the inside of all the flooring. There's none showing through on the outside. This also has a lot of raised wood grain. It's got the bolt heads on it. They're your side rails for building your railroad car out of. All the parts on it look good. They're really crisp. They're not any soft molding on it. It looks really good. Now, one concern Andy had from Andy's hobby headquarters was when you put these two sections of floor together, there is possibility of having, when you put the two sections, that gives you the floor length of your car. He was concerned about light bleeding through on it. But on these railroad cars, if you go look at real ones, these things set outside 24/7. The only time they might go inside is when they are in a shop being worked on, things like that. So the wood in this has a tendency to shrink or expand depending on the outside weather conditions. Humidity, temperature, has it been soaked in the rains for a couple of weeks? Did it set all winter, with snow, with ice, things on it? And also, these would have been used for anything and everything. As it says, transporting vehicles, transporting supplies. So the wood flooring on this would have a tendency to get chewed up, tore up a little bit from vehicles going on it, stuff being thrown in, boxes, barrels that leak. So you could really, on this, especially on this flooring and the sides, because they'd get damaged and beat up, you could really do a lot of really neat weathering or detailing on it as far as damage to it. Or you could really be dedicated and just use the rolling frame and build your own floor and sides. No, I'm not. Somebody else might. All things considered, this is a very good kit. It's a very good looking kit. It's got a lot of detail on it. It's got a lot of possibilities. You could use it any number of ways on a diorama. Everything from being an anti-aircraft gun kit, gun car, to carrying vehicles or equipment. So, until the next time, and this is the Pirate Hunter, and to quote the great Jerry Springer, take care of yourself and each other.